Chapter 492. The aura of the human figure formed by the black mist was not very powerful. Perhaps he was extremely powerful when he was alive, but to Dong Qikuan and the other two martial Dao masters, he was nothing to be afraid of. Dong Qikuan frowned. What kind of monster are you? Monster? The human figure formed by the black mist let out a strange laugh. The laughter was hoarse and ear-piercing. I'm Xianjiuyo, one of the 4 generals under Lord Wenho's command. I could easily crush ants like you when I was at my peak. Dong Qikuan said indifferently. It's a pity that you're not at your peak now. You're just an evil monster without a body. How dare you act so presumptuously? Dong Qikuan and the other 2 were martial Dao masters who had experienced great storms. How could they be intimidated by a guy without a body? Even if what the guy said was true and he could kill them easily when he was at his peak, that was then and now was now. A deep red light blossomed from Xianjiuyo's eyes as he coldly said, There's no point in arguing. Today, all of you are the food for Lord Wenho's resurrection. All of you should feel honored to be able to witness Lord Wenho's resurrection. With that, the demonic aura around Xianjiuyo dispersed, and a wisp of his aura seeped into the unparalleled relic. In an instant, the halberd emitted a blinding red glow. The glass dragon on the halberd seemed to have come to life. Xianjiuyo waved his hand, and a halberd completely formed by demonic aura appeared in his hand. Although the halberd was completely formed from demonic aura, the ferocious aura on it was extremely terrifying. A casual slash from Xianjiuyo already possessed the power to shatter the heavens and split the earth. Dong Qikuan slashed with the longsword in his hand. The boundless radiance turned into specks of stars. In the blink of an eye, the stars completely shrouded everything in the hall. Qiao Liandong was not slow either. He slashed out with the blood-colored Miaodao in his hand, and the scarlet blood-colored edge seemed to tear the sky and earth apart. The saber aura of hundreds of meters burst out, and in an instant, Qiao Liandong had slashed out hundreds of times. The saber aura was dense and terrifying. As for the other martial Dao Grandmaster Su Tingyi, he did not have a weapon. Lightning flashed around his body, and his earth energy turned into endless thunder roars. When he punched, thunder exploded, and he was like a fiend god. His momentum was also terrifying. The power of the 3 martial Dao masters attacking at the same time was truly extraordinary. However, the 3 of them were sent flying by Xianjiuyo's halberd. They were in an extremely miserable state. Dong Qikuan gritted his teeth and said, No, this halberd is definitely not this strong. This demon is borrowing the aura imprint left by Marquis LV Wenho on halberd. No one knew what level of existence Marquis LV Wenho's unparalleled divine weapon was. However, according to everyone's speculation, Marquis LV Wenho's halberd should be a peak 9th transformation divine weapon, but it had not reached the level of a peerless divine weapon. The reason was very simple. If this halberd was really a peerless divine weapon, even a string of Buddha beads would not be able to suppress it. However, even if it was a 9th transformation divine weapon, it was impossible to suppress them to such an extent by just borrowing some of its aura. However, now that things had come to this, no matter what Xianjiuyo was holding, they were no longer as confident as before. Even though they were fighting 3 against 1, they were still forced to retreat. They could not fight back at all. At this moment, Dong Qikuan suddenly looked at the Dong family's disciples and shouted, Find a way to get the Buddha beads on halberd and the true martial evil vanquishing sword on the bronze coffin. As soon as they heard that, the Dong family's cultivators immediately reacted and rushed forward. The other rogue cultivators were stunned for a moment before they also reacted and rushed forward. Now that the 3 martial Dao masters were fighting the monster, if they did not seize the treasures now, when would they be able to? However, Qiao Liandong and Su Tingyi, who were fighting, glared at Dong Qikuan fiercely. This guy did not abide by the rules. They did not bring so many disciples with them, especially Su Tingyi, who did not even have any disciples. The Dong family's cultivators retreated in time after obtaining the treasures. It did not matter even if they destroyed the seal. In any case, they would get the treasures first, and then the Dong family would have a lot of time to deal with these things. In any case, the place of suppression was here, and it could not fly away. However, Qiao Liandong and Su Tingyi were different. They only had one chance to enter here. If they wanted to enter again, they would probably have to force their way in. Dong Chikuan said indifferently, "Don't misunderstand, the two of you. This is also a way to defeat the enemy. Don't they want to resurrect Marquis Lv1Ho? If my Dong family's disciples destroy the corpse in the bronze coffin in advance, won't the problem be solved?" Xiao Liandong and Su Tingyi cursed inwardly. Only an idiot would believe Dong Chikuan's words. If Marquis Lv1Ho's corpse could be destroyed so easily, would there still be this big tomb? It was not like they had never heard of Marquis Lv1Ho's legend. But now, Xian Juyo's side was really anxious, not because they had touched Marquis Lv1Ho's coffin, but because they had touched Halberd. Marquis Lv1Ho's coffin was not easy to touch, but although Halberd's wushuang was suppressed by the Buddha beads, it was also because of the Buddha beads that a wisp of Marquis Lv1Ho's aura did not dissipate, allowing Xian Juyo to borrow it. Once the Buddha beads were gone, although Halberd's ferocious might would be completely released, Marquis Lv1Ho's aura would also dissipate. At that time, the wushuang would become a masterless divine weapon, and besides Marquis Lv1Ho, no one would be able to use it. And at this time, black water appeared on the ground, and a blood coffin also emerged. Shi Jiuling climbed out of the blood coffin, and Shui Wuxiang's figure also condensed. Seeing this, Xian Juyo couldn't help cursing. "What took you so long?" Shi Jiuling let out a strange laugh. "Don't be in such a hurry, I still need to refine enough blood and qi for Lord Wenho to use. Otherwise, these 3 old fellows won't be enough." 3 of the 4 generals under Wenho had already arrived. Apart from Yan Qishao, who was imprisoned in the hall and couldn't move, the other 3 had already gathered. Even if Shi Jiuling and Shui Wuxiang only had 2 people left, they could still fight against dozens of Dong family's cultivators, as well as some rogue cultivators. Just as the situation was in a deadlock for a moment, several loud noises suddenly came from the hall. This was the scene that Chu Xiu saw when he smashed the wall. And when he saw Chu Xiu, Shui Wuxiang's face instantly changed. How did this kid come so fast? He had seen Chu Xiu's strength before, and even he couldn't see through it. And at this time, the other side of the wall was also smashed, and Lu Fengxian and Yan Fian's figures also appeared. Seeing these 2 people, Shui Wuxiang immediately felt a headache. The development of the situation had somewhat exceeded his expectations. Chu Xiu and the others had come too fast. Originally, Shui Wuxiang and the others were prepared to deal with Dong Chikuan and the other 2, and after accumulating enough blood and qi, kill Chu Xiu and the others, and then choose a suitable body to be Lord Wenho's resurrection vessel. In the end, they didn't expect that they would come together. When Chu Xiu saw Lu Fengxian and Yan Fian together, he was also slightly surprised. How did these 2 people come together? Lu Fengxian walked over and said, "I just happened to see Miss Yan being besieged by the monsters in the blood coffin, so I took action to save her." Yan Fian nodded towards Chu Xiu. Her attitude was somewhat cold. After all, Chu Xiu had a conflict with the Yunu Palace. Although the grudges were already settled, Yan Fian definitely wouldn't be too warm towards Chu Xiu. Lu Fengxian looked at the people who were fighting intensely, and asked in puzzlement, "What's going on?" Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "On one side, they want to snatch the treasure, and on the other, they want to kill people for blood and qi. It's that simple. But now, it's time for us to make a move. Brother Lu, do you see that halberd? That's the 9 Revolutions divine weapon Peerless, of the past Marquis Lu Wenho. I'll protect you and snatch Peerless. This divine weapon is destined to be prepared for you." At this time, Yan Fian also saw the powerful aura of the divine weapon Peerless. She couldn't help but ask Chu Xiu, "This is the 9 Revolutions divine weapon that belonged to the demonic god Marquis Lu Wenho. You're so willing to give it away?" It wasn't that Yan Fian thought too darkly of people, but she felt that Chu Xiu was a little too generous. That was a legendary 9 Revolutions divine weapon. It was definitely in existence on the level of a treasure. For it, even blood brothers could kill each other, let alone Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian. Chu Xiu said indifferently, "So what if it's a 9 Revolutions divine weapon? I use a saber, not halberd. My martial path is already fixed. If I were to switch to the martial path for a weapon, wouldn't that be neglecting the essentials?" And I believe that if it wasn't halberd but a saber that appeared here this time, Brother Lu would also give it to me. Yan Fian frowned, still feeling that something was wrong. She didn't have much contact with Chu Xiu, but her intuition told her that Chu Xiu wasn't such a noble person. In reality, Yan Fian's guess wasn't wrong. Chu Xiu was indeed not generous to this extent. However, the most suitable person for Lu Wenho's inheritance was Lu Fengxian. This unparalleled halberd was also prepared for Lu Fengxian. Even if Chu Xiu forcefully snatched it, he wouldn't be able to use it to its greatest effect. On the contrary, he gave the unparalleled halberd to Lu Fengxian. With the relationship between the two of them, as long as Chu Xiu asked for Lu Fengxian's help, Lu Fengxian definitely wouldn't refuse. There was no need to say which was more worthwhile. An effective dead object or a powerful friend who was willing to go through fire and water for you. Chu Xiu was not Nia Donglu in the original plot. He would lose a friend who was destined to become a powerhouse in the future for the sake of an illusory reputation. Chu Xiu would not do something like throwing away a watermelon while picking up sesame seeds. Lu Fengxian also knew Chu Xiu's personality, so he didn't stand on ceremony with Chu Xiu. He just cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, Brother Chu. When we get out, I'll treat you to a drink." A 9 revolutions divine weapon was certainly not as simple as a drink. However, if Chu Xiu needed him in the future, even if there wasn't even a drink, Lu Fengxian would still come to help. Chapter 493. When Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian joined hands to seize the peerless divine weapon, almost no one present could stop them. When 2 of the top 10 on the Dragon and Tiger list made a move, whether it was the Dong family's martial artists or the rogue cultivators, they could only retreat. Shui Wuxiang and Shi Jiling were also beaten badly when facing Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian. It should be said that these 2 people were originally defeated by Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian. At this time, they couldn't resist the joint attack of the 2 people and retreated step by step. At present, only Yan Fian was qualified to compete with Chu Xiu and the others. However, Yan Fian had just been rescued by Lu Fengxian, so she naturally wouldn't make things difficult for Lu Fengxian. Moreover, the 5 major sword sects only use swords. Halberd was only used to trade in her hands, so it was of little significance to the Yu Palace. Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian arrived in front of the peerless halberd. Chu Xiu directly slashed out with his saber. In an instant, boundless devil chi erupted and blasted on the Buddhist beads. However, a bright Buddhist light directly melted away Chu Xiu's devil chi, and there was no change. The ancient halberd in Lu Fengxian's hands also swept out horizontally. The scarlet moon shone brightly as a powerful astral chi smashed down, emitting a deafening sound. Although the prayer beads didn't change, they dimmed a little. Chu Xiu seemed to be deep in thought. He put away his saber and formed a seal. His hand formed a great Vajrawheel seal, and his power was terrifying. One seal after another, the Buddhist light on the Buddhist beads began to dim at a speed almost visible to the naked eye. The power of the Buddhist beads was indeed very strong, but it was only strong in suppressing the devil chi. It didn't have much resistance against other forces. Finally, with a loud bang, the Buddhist beads scattered violently. Without the imprisonment of the Buddhist beads, halberd's peerless sword suddenly blossomed with a trace of incomparably fierce sharpness. Xian Jiuyo, who was in the midst of fighting Dong Qikuan's team of 3, immediately grunted. It was as though he had lost his source of power, and the speed at which he attacked abruptly slowed down. Xian Jiuyo had borrowed the aura left behind by LV Wenho on halberd. However, this aura had already disappeared along with halberd's seal. Therefore, Xian Jiuyo could no longer casually use this power. Every time he attacked, his strength would weaken a little. If he continued to fight, his strength would be completely exhausted. At this time, Chu Xiu did not care so much. He directly shouted in a low voice, "Seize the divine weapon." As soon as he finished speaking, Chu Xiu waved his hand, and more than half of the scattered Buddhist beads flew into his hand. There was still some power left in these Buddhist beads. Although they could no longer be used as Buddhist beads by linking them together, refining them would still allow Chu Xiu's Buddhist sect cultivation method to greatly increase his cultivation. At this time, Lu Fengxian also did not stand on ceremony. He directly grabbed towards halberd. However, at this time, an extremely fierce aura blossomed above Halberd. It was incomparably sharp like the edge of a blade. Even with Lu Fengxian's cultivation, he was directly blown away by this aura. After all, a 9 revolutions divine weapon was a 9 revolutions divine weapon. Once the seal was lifted, in this world, apart from demon god LV1Ho, no one else was qualified to make a divine weapon take the initiative to recognize a master. At this time, when the other cultivators saw that Lu Fengxian had failed to obtain the peerless sword, their eyes suddenly lit up and they also flocked towards Halberd. Although they also knew that even Lu Fengxian had failed to obtain the peerless sword in one try, and their hopes were extremely slim, it was still a divine weapon after all. Moreover, it was a legendary 9 revolutions divine weapon. With greed in front of them, they could not help but be tempted. A chaotic battle broke out. And at this time several people came out from the corridor outside. Among them was Ying Bailu. Seeing Yan Fian here, Ying Bailu immediately walked over and asked with concern, "Miss Yan, are you all right?" Yan Fian shook his head, pointed at Shi Juling and said, "It was more daunting than dangerous. I was tricked into that guy's secret chamber, but at the crucial moment, it was brother Lu Fengxian who saved me." Ying Bailu paused for a moment before saying apologetically, "I was late. I wanted to go back to the pool to see which path you took, but after I got rid of the concealment spell, I found that there were over 100 paths densely packed together, so I didn't have enough time to identify them." Yan Fian sighed and said, "Young Master Ying, you really don't have to be like this. I already told you about the matter between you and me. It is impossible. From the day I joined the Yunnu Palace, I was destined to be the successor of the Yunnu Palace, and you are the successor of the Shangshui Ying clan. The rules are here. You and I are destined to be fated, but not fated." Ying Bailu was not angry, nor was he discouraged. He just stood with his hands behind his back and said with a smile, "Fate is determined by the heavens. Unfortunately, I don't believe in the heavens and I don't believe in fate. In this world, nothing is absolutely predestined. Everyone says that I, Ying Bailu, was born with an auspicious omen, and that I am definitely not an ordinary person. But what does my achievements today have to do with that so-called auspicious omen? A white deer holding a Ganoderma is an auspicious omen, and a dark cloud covering my head means that I am destined to be mediocre for the rest of my life. I, Ying Bailu, have my achievements today not because of an auspicious omen, but because I am Ying Bailu. Martial Tao, cultivation method, zither, chess, calligraphy, art of war and strategy, Ying Bailu was proficient in all of them. But in this world, there were no geniuses born with knowledge. These were all learned and comprehended by Ying Bailu himself. In fact, Ying Bailu did not like people discussing his birth, because that would erase all his hard work. Just like he said, even if he was born with dark clouds covering his head, he was still Ying Bailu. Yan Fian sighed again. Among the younger generation of the Jianghu, Ying Bailu was really outstanding. Compared to others, Ying Bailu was almost flawless. Compared to Zhong Xian's stubborn personality and Fang Qixiao's unreliability, Ying Bailu's way of dealing with people was magnanimous and smooth, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. His bearing did not lose to those older generation warriors. And compared to Chu Xiao, who was too murderous and had a bad reputation, Ying Bailu's reputation in the Jianghu was also very good. Although he did not like to accumulate fame for himself like Nia Donglu, at least there was no bad side to Ying Bailu. This was Ying Bailu. Although he might not have reached the peak in any aspect, there was no way to find any flaws in him. Of course, infatuation was not a flaw. Unfortunately, as Yan Fian said, they were destined not to be together. She was destined to inherit the Yunnu Palace in the future. What she had to consider now was much more than the other younger generation warriors. At this time, Ying Bailu did not pester Yan Fian. Instead, he turned his attention to the battlefield. Although Ying Bailu was infatuated and always expressed his love for Yan Fian, he would never pester someone to the end, which was disgusting. Seeing Chu Xiao, Lu Fengxian, and the others fighting for the unparalleled divine armament, Ying Bailu's eyes narrowed. He said in a low voice, "Is it the unparalleled divine armament of the ancient demon god Lu Wenhou? Good stuff." Yan Fian paused. She wanted to say something, but Ying Bailu said before she could, You want to say that halberd is useless to me, and you want me to give it to Lu Fengxian? Yanfian hesitated, but she still nodded. She said, I'm just suggesting that Lu Fengxian is the most suitable for the unparalleled divine armament. Moreover, Chu Xiu is not to be trifled with. Among the younger generation, only you and Feng Qi can compete with Chu Xiu. But Feng Qi is not here right now. Moreover, he is from Sword King City and has a good relationship with Chu Xiu. He should not participate in the fight. If you fight with Chu Xiu now, it will be a fierce battle. Both sides will only suffer, and it will most likely benefit others. Lu Fengxian had just saved her, so Yanfian also wanted to return the favor to Lu Fengxian. However, she had also just rejected Ying Bailu. At this time, it was not appropriate for her to beg Ying Bailu not to make a move. Ying Bailu looked at the battlefield, shook his head and said, Miss Yan, it is true that I am in love with you. I can find anything you want for you. However, I am still a man. No matter how broad-minded I am, if you ask me to give this opportunity to another man, I will not comply. I have no use for halberd, but that does not mean that the Ying clan does not. The Shangshui Ying clan's foundation is much deeper than you can imagine. Moreover, I am also a cultivator. Although I do not care much about fame and fortune, it does not mean that I do not have the desire to excel. Chu Xiu has surpassed me on the Longhu list. I will not be so bored as to fight with him just because of the changes in Wind Sweeping Tower's list. However, since there is a chance now, I do not mind fighting with him. I want to see how strong Chu Xiu, whom Wind Sweeping Tower thinks has surpassed me, is. After he finished speaking, Ying Bailu took a step forward. His figure was like a swimming dragon, leaping over a distance of more than 30 meters, and entering the chaotic battlefield. Behind him, Yanfian's eyes flashed with a strange light. At this moment, she finally understood that Ying Bailu was in love with her. However, Ying Bailu was not just the Ying Bailu who had been chasing after her and trying to curry favor with her. He was also the pinnacle figure among the young talents of this generation of martial arts. He was the unparalleled, young master peerless, Ying Bailu. At this moment in the battlefield, Chu Xiu slashed out with his saber. Demonic chi surged and roared into the heavens and earth as he faced the itinerant cultivators who were fighting for halberd. The might of the Tao of Avicii's 3 saber strikes made the hearts of the itinerant cultivators tremble. Apart from martial artists who were also at the oneness of heaven and man realm, almost everyone else was killed by Chu Xiu's saber strike. At this moment, a dragon's roar rang out. Black astral energy condensed into a dragon's claw and grabbed onto Chu Xiu's saber strike. With a loud bang, it was crushed. Chu Xiu looked up and saw Ying Bailu's black robe fluttering in the astral energy. The black astral energy around his body condensed into the shape of a black dragon that coiled behind him. The dragon looked majestic. Ying Bailu himself stood straight, and his artistic conception was actually compatible with the black dragon behind him, giving off a feeling of incomparable harmony. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, Brother Ying, are you interested in halberd as well? I thought you didn't use any weapons? Ying Bailu said indifferently, I don't use weapons, but that doesn't mean the other seniors of the Ying clan don't use experts like halberd. After all, Peerless is a 9-revolution divine weapon, and it was the weapon of the devil god Lv Wenho. It's normal for me to be tempted. Brother Chu, I don't care much about your ranking on the Longhu leaderboard, but since there's a chance, I'd like to fight you. I want to see if those people from Wind Sweeping Tower are right. Chapter 494. Among the top 5 experts on the Longhu list, Chu Xiu had fought with Feng Qi and Zhong Xian before. If Chu Xiu were to fight with Feng Qi now, the outcome would be unknown. Feng Qi's karma sword principle was very strong. Last time, Chu Xiu had fought with Feng Qi on Floating Jade Mountain. At that time, Feng Qi had definitely not used his full strength. Moreover, with Feng Qi's strength, Chu Xiu believed that his real trump card was definitely not as simple as a simple karma sword principle. As for Zhong Xian, with Chu Xiu's current strength, he also admitted that he was indeed not a match for Zhong Xian. This was a gap in strength, which could not be made up for the time being except for accumulating strength through bitter cultivation. As for Ying Bailu, His reputation in the Jianghu was not inferior to Zhong Xian and Fang Qishao. The reason why he was ranked behind Zhong Xian and Fang Qishao was that he had fought less. Chu Xiu did not underestimate his enemy. In his eyes, Ing Bailu was definitely the kind of enemy that must be treated with caution. Chu Xiu slowly drew out the heavenly demon dance. Wherever the long saber pointed, a turbulent demon chi surged. Chu Xiu's eyes had already turned red, and he had entered the selfless killing realm. As the saber slashed down, with demon chi as the foundation and evil chi as the blade, a powerful chi suddenly erupted. Demon chi drifted throughout the hall, causing the expressions of the experts who had been fighting with Chu Xiu for halberd to suddenly change. This was Chu Xiu's true state of attack. If Chu Xiu had used this state just now, they would not have been able to leave many alive under Chu Xiu's hands. Ing Bailu's eyes lit up when he saw Chu Xiu's attack. Ever since Ing Bailu had stepped into the unity of heaven and man realm, he rarely fought with others. Because of this, his ranking on the Longhu leaderboard had been lowered by Wind Sweeping Tower and given to Chu Xiu. Ing Bailu was also a martial artist. Although he did not have a competitive heart, it did not mean that he did not want to fight. The reason why Ing Bailu didn't make a move earlier was because there was no need to. At that time, Ing Bailu was already ranked 5th on the Longhu leaderboard. The 4 people in front of him were not easy to deal with. Ing Bailu did not care about his reputation that much, so he did not choose to challenge the people in front of him. However, things were different now. Since he had the peerless divine weapon, Ing Bailu didn't mind fighting with Chu Xiu. He wanted to see if Chu Xiu, who had forced him off the dragon and tiger leaderboard, was as strong as Wind Sweeping Tower thought. The black dragon roared, and its anger soared to the sky. Ing Bailu's stellar energy was so dense that it was terrifying. The ink-colored stellar energy around him condensed into a huge wave that was not inferior to Chu Xiu's powerful devil chi and evil chi. As the black dragon roared, its stellar energy tore through Chu Xiu's devil chi. The dragon-shaped true chi transformed into a huge dragon claw that slashed down on Chu Xiu's head. The claw was over 30 meters long, and it seemed like it was going to crush Chu Xiu. Raising his head, he saw that the demonic saber in Chu Xiu's hand was emitting a boundless ferocious aura. The 3 sabers of the Way of Avicii slashed out, and the 3 sabers merged into one. The dragon claw did not manage to crush Chu Xiu, but was torn apart by Chu Xiu's saber. However, at this moment, Ing Bailu closed in. His body shone with an incomparably dense layer of ink-colored true chi. His figure was like an azure dragon, and a casual strike of his carried the power of a powerful battle skill. Dragons fight in the wild, killing in the pugilistic world. Ing Bailu did not have any weapons, but once he attacked, his entire body would be as terrifying as a weapon. The Shangshui Ing clan's royal heavenly treasure records was not very famous in the pugilistic world. It was because most people could not tell what kind of cultivation technique it was. They did not even know what its special characteristics were. However, as Ing Bailu exchanged blows with Chu Xiu more or less understood what the special characteristics of the Royal Heavenly Treasure Records were. The special characteristic of the Royal Heavenly Treasure Records was that it had no special characteristics. However, one would not be able to find any flaws in this cultivation technique. The demon saber in Chu Xiu's hand slashed down consecutively, and the saber auras were extremely sharp. However, Ing Bailu dared to use his own gang chi to take on precious weapons head-on. Moreover, he did not seem to be at a disadvantage at all. The quality of his gang chi was extremely condensed. The two of them exchanged several tens of blows within a short period of time. It seemed like neither of them could do anything to the other. Although Chu Xiu's demon saber was domineering and fierce, Ing Bailu's gang chi was extremely powerful. He could completely take on Chu Xiu head-on. Chu Xiu frowned slightly, sheathed his saber and retreated. However, Ing Bailu did not give in at all. The black gang chi around him condensed into the shape of a black dragon. However, its body was straight, just like a dragon's spear. With a thrust of the spear, endless sharp chi gathered on the dragon's head, and the winds and clouds parted. Ing Bailu did not need to use any weapons. However, under the control of the Royal Heavenly Treasure Records gang chi, his spear attack had a powerful aura of being able to hold out against 10,000 enemies. Even those experts who use spears in military formations might not be able to have Ing Bailu's aura. Chu Xiu held onto the Dugu seal, and the Gangqi shield instantly rose up. It was as immovable as a mountain, impervious to all arts. Dugu Yin's defense against attacks of the Gangqi attribute was very strong. Logically speaking, Dugu Yin's defense against Ing Bailu's attack should be better than that of a cultivator with a powerful physical body like Zhong Xian. However, Ing Bailu's attack was extremely strange. When the dragon spear struck Dugu Yin's body, a strange force spun continuously, rapidly whittling away at Dugu Yin's strength. It broke through the point at which Dugu Yin's strength was crushed. Chu Xiu's countenance changed. He formed the Wisdom Fist imprint, and set up a Gangqi domain that was like an inescapable net. Although the dragon spear, which was less than 10 feet away from Chu Xiu, slowed down a little, it still continued to pierce toward Chu Xiu's chest without stopping. Ing Bailu had no enmity with Chu Xiu. Even if he was a little uncomfortable with Lu Fengxian, he would not vent his anger on Chu Xiu. Although Ing Bailu was not very broad-minded, he was not that narrow-minded. Ing Bailu did not hold back, because he knew that Chu Xiu's strength was there for all to see. Chu Xiu was definitely in existence that could fight him. Against such an opponent, holding back would mean that he would lose. Therefore, Ing Bailu would not hold back. Instead, he would go all out. Moreover, he did not think that Chu Xiu would be so weak. If Chu Xiu could not even withstand his spear attack, he would be letting down the Wind-Sweeping Tower's ranking. The Wind-Sweeping Tower's importance to the top 5 of the Dragon and Tiger leaderboard was no less than the Wind Cloud list. In fact, this was indeed the case. Although Ing Bailu's spear attack was only a little slower under the Wisdom Fist Seal's aura field, this slight delay was more than enough. Boundless killing intent condensed. When Chu Xiu's fist landed, a scarlet light suddenly erupted, extinguishing heaven and earth, annihilating Oblivion-killing fist. An explosion of aura field was heard. Under the Oblivion-killing fist, the dragon spear suddenly shattered. Even Ing Bailu was shocked by the killing intent. However, Ing Bailu still did not retreat. The ink-colored aura field condensed in his left hand again, and a dragon coiled around it. However, this time, it did not condense into a dragon spear. Instead, it condensed into the shape of a long saber. This time, the dragon's head was the handle, and the long and narrow dragon tail condensed into the shape of a blade. The saber slashed down, as if it could split the sky, and moved forward with indomitable will. The saber was domineering, and the most important thing was the momentum. Chu Xiu used the saber, so he could naturally feel the true intent and momentum contained in Ing Bailu's attack. It was not inferior to his attainments in the way of the saber, but Chu Xiu's path was different from Ing Bailu's. Looking at the saber, Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes, and there was a solemn look in his eyes. It was only at this moment that Chu Xiu understood why Ing Bailu was known as Young Master Peerless. The person who gave Ing Bailu this nickname might have done so because Ing Bailu knew too many miscellaneous things, but in fact, Ing Bailu was also like that in the way of martial arts. That spear strike just now in the hands of a true spear user, such as the generals of Northern Yan and Eastern Qi, could not be considered stunning, nor could it be considered too powerful. But among martial artists of the same level, or even some weaker martial Dao masters, there were not many who could compare to Ing Bailu. And now, Ing Bailu's saber technique was the same. Although it was not amazing, it could at least be ranked at the top among those of the same level. No wonder Ing Bailu did not use a weapon. With his attainments, he could use any weapon skillfully. He might as well use his Imperial Heavenly Treasure records to form a weapon with his Gangqi. If the other members of the Shangshui Ing clan were as strong as Ing Bailu, then halberd would be very useful to the Shangshui Ing clan. At this moment, Chu Xiu did not retreat in the face of Ing Bailu's attack. Instead, he took it head-on. Placing his right hand in front of his chest, he formed the Fearless Seal. The murderous intent in Chu Xiu's eyes receded, and in its place was a majestic and dazzling Buddhist light, making Chu Xiu look extremely dignified. Amidst the boundless Buddhist light, the shadow of a Vairocana appeared behind Chu Xiu and merged with Chu Xiu. In an instant, Chu Xiu felt as if his entire body was on fire, and powerful energy filled his body. A palm strike, shifting sun steals the heavens. Under the shifting sun art, The great dragon saber in Ing Bailu's hand shattered. The powerful energy caused the usually calm Ing Bailu's expression to change slightly. Moreover, it was not over after shattering Ing Bailu's great dragon saber. The power of the shifting sun art pressed down on Ing Bailu, enveloping him in a majestic Buddhist light. As the core cultivation technique of Master Tan Yuan, a true fire spirit refinement realm expert, there was no need to doubt the power of the great sun-changing technique. In fact, when Chu Xiu used his full strength and disregarded the consumption of his energy, he could fight Zhongxian head-on until they were evenly matched. Ing Bailu's expression was solemn, but he did not choose to retreat. Instead, there was a strange change in his eyes. His jet-black pupils suddenly turned golden, and his pupils were vertical, like some kind of snake. At the same time, a deafening dragon's roar rang out around him. Boundless black energy enveloped Ing Bailu and transformed into 9 black dragon silhouettes that coiled around Ing Bailu. They roared and revolved around him as they fought against Chu Xiu's great sun-shifting art. Chapter 495. The battle between Chu Xiu and Ing Bailu could be said to have dazzled everyone's eyes. It could be said to be full of ups and downs, but it also let them see the true strength of the younger generation. However, even at this moment, the two sides were still evenly matched, and they were in a stalemate. Last time, when Chu Xiu fought with Zhongxian, they were also in a stalemate, but at that time, Chu Xiu could feel that if the stalemate continued, he would definitely lose. Because Zhongxian's strength was too strong, so strong that in the end, the first to exhaust his strength would definitely be him. And this time, although Chu Xiu was not sure that he could win against Ing Bailu, he did not feel that he was inferior. If they really fought with their full strength, the outcome of the two sides was still unknown. Chu Xiu still had many trump cards that he had not used, and he believed that Ing Bailu would be the same. However, while Chu Xiu and Ing Bailu were still in a stalemate, Dong Qikuan and the others had already changed. Xianjuyo had been suppressed for 10,000 years, and his strength was actually not much different from Shi Juling and the others. It was only because he had triggered the imprint left by Lu Wenho that he could erupt with this level of power. But at this time, because Halberd's seal had been lifted, the imprint left by Lu Wenho had completely disappeared, and Xianjuyo could no longer borrow power, so it could be said that he was getting weaker and weaker. At the beginning he was suppressing Dong Qikuan and the others, but later, it was Dong Qikuan and the others suppressing him. Without the pressure, Xiao Liandong looked at the battle between Chu Xiu and Ing Bailu, and a trace of haze appeared in his eyes. Last time in the Dead Man Valley he was scared away by Chu Xiu, and this time, Chu Xiu still dared to be arrogant, relying on Fang Qishao and Xia Xiaolu by his side, which made Xiao Liandong, who was not very broad-minded, somewhat dissatisfied. Previously in the mountain opening ceremony, if Dong Qikuan had not given him a way out, and Xia Xiaolu and Fang Qishao were not there, Xiao Liandong might have already made a move. Now that Xia Xiaolu and Fang Qishao were not there, and this Chu Xiu put on an appearance of fighting for the divine weapon, Dong Qikuan would not speak for him anymore. This time he would not let Chu Xiu continue to be arrogant. However, Xiao Liandong did not directly make a move. Although he was not broad-minded, he did not want to make a move. Xiao Liandong did not make the first. Although he was not broad-minded, he did not want others to say that. Therefore Qiao Xiu and Sorting Chu Master, Yaning Ming and Bailu Qiu, and Ening Ing and Chu Xiu, and if the sneak attack was successful, they could cooperate with Ing Bailu to get rid of Chu Xiu. Even if it failed, it did not matter. At that time, Fang Ting would pretend to be injured, and it would be Qiao Liandong's turn to make a move. Although Qiao Liandong would be said to be protective, his reputation for being protective had long been known, and he was not afraid of people saying it. In any case, it was better than being narrow-minded and taking the initiative to find trouble with the younger generation. At this time, hearing Qiao Liandong's message, Fang Ting's eyes suddenly revealed a strange look. He quietly withdrew from the fight with the other martial artists, and seeing that Lu Fengxian did not notice his movements, he went behind Chu Xiu. Fang Ting was nearly 50 years old when he stepped into the unity of heaven and man realm. In fact, he was not much younger than Xiao Liandong. If he was asked to fight with Chu Xiu head-on, even if his master, Xiao Liandong, had instructed him, Fong Ting would not dare. But now it was just a sneak attack, and it was not a problem. A slender Miaodao was held in Fong Ting's hand. His eyes suddenly blossomed with an ominous glint. Blood qi condensed on the edge of the blade, and he suddenly slashed at Chu Xiu's back. Even when he was fighting with Ying Bailu, Chu Xiu still did not relax his vigilance in other areas. Even before Fong Ting unsheathed his saber, Chu Xiu had already sensed the killing intent on his body. For a martial artist at the unity of heaven and man realm like Fong Ting, not to mention that Chu Xiu had already reached the unity of heaven and man realm, even if Chu Xiu was at the five Qi's origin realm, it would be easy to kill him. However, now that Chu Xiu was using the sun-changing technique to fight against Ying Bailu, Fong Ting's sneak attack had really found the right time. Sensing that the blade was coming, Chu Xiu did not retreat to defend, and there was no panic in his eyes. A ray of Buddha's light suddenly bloomed behind him, and with a thunderous boom, like the roar of Buddha's thunder, it immediately shattered Fong Ting's blade. His face could not help but turn pale, and he was directly shaken back. Outer Lion Seal. The fast and slow 9 words formula required hand seals to be formed. However, Chu Xiu was already rather familiar with these 9 hand seals. He was even able to form different hand seals with both hands at the same time. Chu Xiu believed that it wouldn't be long before he could combine the 9 hand seals of the fast and slow 9 words formula and unleash its strongest power. At this time, Chu Xiu did not make hand seals, but only used his true qi to activate the outer lion seal. This was also a manifestation of Chu Xiu's extreme understanding of the fast and slow 9 words formula. Although its power was incomparable to the use of hand seals, it was enough to deal with an opponent of Fong Ting's level. On the other side, Ying Bailu could not help but frown when he saw that someone had actually sneaked up on Chu Xiu. He began to slowly withdraw his power, and the 9 dragons barrier disappeared. It was true that he wanted to fight with Chu Xiu, but he only wanted a simple battle, not because of his reputation on the Longhu list. Although he was not as noble as Ying Bailu, he still had his pride. If he won because someone had sneaked up on Chu Xiu, then even if the Longhu list re-ranked him as the 5th, Ying Bailu would not be able to accept this ranking. After Ying Bailu took the initiative to withdraw his attack, Chu Xiu naturally also withdrew his great sun shifting technique and turned around. In an instant, Fong Ting felt a great pressure coming at him, as if he was being targeted by an ancient beast. In an instant, Fong Ting felt a chill in his heart, and just as he was about to say something, he saw that Chu Xiu's eyes had already turned red. As his fist fell, boundless killing intent condensed, and the killing intent stirred the heaven and earth yuan qi, causing Fong Ting's hair to stand on end. Annihilating skies and destroying earth oblivion killing fist. Under this fist that was condensed with boundless killing intent, Fong Ting did not even have time to say a word. His earth vigor exploded around him, and the long saber in his hand slashed down, his figure quickly dodging to the side. But all of this was useless under Chu Xiu's annihilating skies and destroying earth oblivion killing fist. As the fist fell, the scarlet killing intent seemed to condense into a solid substance. With a loud explosion, Fong Ting's figure was directly blasted into a bloody mist by Chu Xiu's fist, and not even his bones were left. Chu Xiu. Seeing this scene, Xiao Liandong roared, and his eyes were already flashing with boundless killing intent, as if he had gone mad. This series of changes happened too quickly, so quickly that even Xiao Liandong did not have time to stop it. Previously, Xiao Liandong thought that even if Fong Ting's sneak attack failed, it would not be a big deal. After all, Chu Xiu was fighting with Ying Bailu. But he did not expect that Ying Bailu would take the initiative to stop at this time, giving Chu Xiu the opportunity to kill his eldest disciple, Fong Ting, in one move. In fact, Xiao Liandong was so angry now, not because Chu Xiu killed his disciple, but because he would not have a good helper in the future. Among Xiao Liandong's disciples, although Fong Ting was the eldest disciple, he wasn't the most talented one, nor was he the one Xiao Liandong doted on the most. However, he was the one who helped Xiao Liandong the most. Among his disciples, Fong Ting had followed Xiao Liandong the longest, and he was also the one who could understand Xiao Liandong's intentions the best. So, Xiao Liandong usually ordered Fong Ting to do most of the things. But now, Fong Ting died in the hands of Chu Xiu, which was equivalent to cutting off one of his arms. How could Xiao Liandong not be angry? On this side, Xiao Liandong directly gave up fighting Xianjuyo and went straight to Chu Xiu. The floating blood divine blade in his hand was already flashing with terrifying killing intent. Chu Xiu, you crippled my youngest disciple, and now you killed my eldest disciple. If I don't kill you today, how can I still have the face to stand in the West Chu land? Die for me. With a furious roar, Xiao Liandong went straight to Chu Xiu. The floating blood divine blade suddenly erupted with a powerful blade light that was hundreds of feet long, slashing at Chu Xiu. Moreover, Xiao Liandong's blade momentum seemed to be endless, and he had slashed hundreds of times in an instant. The strength of a martial Dao Grand Master was revealed for a moment. Even if Xiao Liandong was a rogue cultivator, even if he belonged to the kind of existence that was not too strong among the martial Dao Grand Masters, he was still a martial Dao Grand Master powerhouse who had condensed the martial Dao true core. When he attacked, regardless of anything else, just the difference in strength was not something that a unity of heaven realm martial artists could compare with. Chu Xiu took a deep breath, and the heavenly demon dance in his hand also erupted with the same powerful demonic qi and killing intent. He slashed out again and again, resisting Xiao Liandong's attack with great difficulty. After all, a martial Dao Grand Master was a martial Dao Grand Master. A casual attack from the other party was enough for Chu Xiu to use all his strength to resist. On the other side, Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi, who were fighting with Xianjuyo, exchanged glances. Neither of them made a move. At this moment, Xianjuyo was no longer a concern. Even without Xiao Liandong, the two of them could also deal with him. Moreover, as Xiao Liandong had thought before, the Dong clan had nothing to do with Chu Xiu. At this moment, Dong Qikuan could not be bothered to care about the personal grievances between Chu Xiu and Xiao Liandong. Meanwhile, Ing Bailu also stood aside without any reaction. He was not considered Chu Xiu's friend, and it was kind of him not to hit him when he was down. It was basically impossible for him to help Chu Xiu. Only Lu Fengxian wanted to help Chu Xiu, but he was at the 5 Qis collecting in the origin stage. As soon as he rushed forward, he was directly sent flying by Xiao Liandong's saber. After all, there was a difference of 2 major realms. Chu Xiu could barely resist Xiao Liandong's attack, but it was difficult for Lu Fengxian to resist. Chapter 496. The pressure that a martial Dao Grandmaster brought to Chu Xiu was extraordinary, but Chu Xiu was still able to withstand it. If the top 3 on the Longhu list went all out, they might really be able to match the strength of a martial Dao Grandmaster. At the very least, although Xiao Liandong could bring pressure to Chu Xiu, the pressure was not as strong as when Chu Xiu was facing Zhong Xian. On the other side, Xiao Liandong saw that he could only suppress Chu Xiu and had yet to defeat Chu Xiu. Xiao Liandong's expression turned a little ugly. Sometimes, the older generation of martial artists did not want to fight with the younger generation of martial artists. The reason was very simple: it was not worth it. When the older generation of martial artists fought with the younger generation of martial artists, it was expected that they would win, and they would have to bear the reputation of bullying the weak. However, if they lost, they would become the stepping stone of the younger generation of martial artists, and they would be accused of being useless as they got older. Although Xiao Liandong did not lose, he was a martial Dao Grandmaster after all. Yet he still failed to suppress Chu Xiu after making so many moves. He could even feel the strange gazes of the other martial artists. Sensing the gazes of the others, Xiao Liandong attacked more fiercely. The blood-colored saber aura slashed down like a downpour, but it still could not do anything to Chu Xiu. These saber aura were either directly smashed by Chu Xiu or offset by Chu Xiu's defensive means such as Dugusil. Although it looked a little embarrassing, Chu Xiu could at least block it. Moreover, Chu Xiu was actually at a disadvantage in the battle at the moment because this place suppressed his mental power, making it temporarily impossible for him to use heaven's sun gazing at air and some other mental secret techniques. Therefore, it was inevitable that Chu Xiu would lose a part of his combat power. If Chu Xiu attacked with all his strength, he would not even be in a sorry state. While Chu Xiu was holding on, Xiao Liandong was really angry. The blood-red long saber in his hand burst with a boundless ferocious sharpness. As the saber slashed down, the blood-red saber aura extended in an instant, converging into a river of blood in midair, shrouding Chu Xiu. The saber sliced the blood river, and heaven and earth feared destruction. The incomparably huge blood river extended for nearly 1,000 feet. The power it exuded was incomparably terrifying, not giving Chu Xiu any room to dodge at all. In an instant, Buddhist light erupted around Chu Xiu, and the shadow of Vairocana merged with him, emitting a dazzling radiance. The great art of changing sun was executed. This time, Chu Xiu burned almost all of his strength. He held the seal of fearlessness in his hand, and his Dharma image was solemn. Boundless Buddhist light shone out, and when his palm descended, he actually held up the blood river and was in a deadlock with it. "Break for me!" Xiao Liandong roared, and powerful Gang Qi erupted around his body, triggering the power of heaven and earth, even causing the surrounding Qi of heaven and earth to explode. The Buddhist light shattered, and the shadow of Vairocana shattered. Chu Xiu's figure continued to retreat, until he retreated a few hundred feet, directly to a corner of the palace. For the current Chu Xiu, there was still a big gap between him and a martial Dao grandmaster. A grandmaster expert condensed the martial Dao true core, and communicated with heaven and earth. No matter how strong a person was, they could not compete with the power of heaven and earth. Xiao Liandong's sudden eruption was really something that Chu Xiu could not resist. Xiao Liandong stepped forward with his saber, his face full of killing intent. Chu Xiu looked up, and suddenly saw the tunnel he had created before. He said to Lu Fengxian in a deep voice, "Brother Lu, don't worry about me. You go and guard Halberd first. Don't let it fall into the hands of others." As soon as he said that, Chu Xiu directly formed the internal binding seal, turned around, and fled to the tunnel he had created before. Seeing Chu Xiu's actions, Xiao Liandong hesitated for a moment, but he also chased after him. On the side of Wen Ho's inheritance, it seemed that the outcome would not be decided for a while. Even if the outcome was decided, there was still Dong Qikuan and Su Ting. The two of them would inevitably have to go through a fierce battle. Therefore, it would not be too late for him to come back and compete with them after he killed Chu Xiu. With that thought in mind, Xiao Liandong only hesitated for a moment before he immediately chased after Chu Xiu. Behind him, Lu Fengxian frowned, but he was not too worried. He knew Chu Xiu's character. Generally, Chu Xiu would never put himself in danger. Since Chu Xiu said he was confident, he must be confident. At that moment, in the tunnel, even though Chu Xiu had unleashed the power of the internal binding seal, Xiao Liandong was still chasing after him. No matter how fast the internal binding seal was, it could not shake off a martial Dao master like Xiao Liandong. Of course, Chu Xiu had never thought of shaking off Xiao Liandong. After running for another 15 minutes, a palace appeared in front of Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu jumped directly into it, and appeared in front of him was Yan Qishao, who was imprisoned here. Seeing that Chu Xiu had returned, Yan Qishao could not help but be surprised. "Why are you back again?" Chu Xiu chuckled and said, "I brought you a big gift." Before Yan Qishao could react, Xiao Liandong had already appeared in the main hall. Seeing this scene, Xiao Liandong was stunned for a moment, then he sneered and said, "Brat, you want to rely on this monster to resist me?" In the great hall where Marquis Wen was suppressed, the three demons didn't gain any advantage from me even when they joined hands. Yan Qixiao's skull suddenly bloomed with a wisp of blue flame. He roared, "Who are you calling a monster? Do you want to die?" Chu Xiu faintly said to Yan Qixiao, "It seems like there's a problem with your plan. Your three companions are currently being ganged up on, and they're almost unable to hold on. Now, I'll help you lure one over, and we can join hands to kill him. This will also reduce some of the pressure on your three companions." At this time, Yan Qishao suddenly sneered and said, "Do you really think I'm an idiot? Although under Lord Wen Ho in the past, although I was in charge of using my hands and not in charge of using my brains, I can still see that it is clearly you, a junior, who has enmity with that fellow. Now you want to use me and drag me down with you. There is no such thing in this world." Seeing that Xiao Liandong had already walked over with a sneer, Chu Xiu quickly said, "This is not use, but mutual benefit. If you want to resurrect Marquis Lu Wen Ho, As long as you don't use me as a body, I don't care whether you live or die. On the contrary, your people are now at a disadvantage. If I didn't help you lure one over, your 3 companions would have been defeated. In any case, you and I have a common enemy. You won't suffer a loss if you kill him. Yan Qishao was slightly hesitant. Although he was not stupid, he was not good at using his brain. He did not know how to make a decision. At this time, Shui Wuxiang's doppelganger suddenly emerged from the ground and shouted, "Yan Qishao, help him!" Over at Shui Wuxiang's side, he and Shi Jiuling could only bitterly resist, while Xian Jiuya was getting weaker and weaker. If Qiao Liandong was allowed to return, then Xian Jiuya would immediately be defeated. Shui Wuxiang's doppelgangers were everywhere in this sealed land. After he sensed the movement here, he immediately made a decision for Yan Qishao. Hearing Shui Wuxiang's words, Yan Qishao did not hesitate. The 4 iron chains in his hands and feet danced in the air and smashed towards Qiao Liandong's head with blazing flames. Qiao Liandong coldly snorted and slashed with the floating blood divine saber in his hand, directly chopping away the iron chains. Although he failed to cut them, it was clear that Yan Qishao's attack had no effect on Qiao Liandong. However, Chu Xiu took advantage of this opportunity and took the initiative to attack. He took a step forward and entered the selfless killing realm. The devil chi around his body had been raised to the extreme. With a slash of his saber, the devil chi surged up to the sky like a devil god. Qiao Liandong's eyes revealed a trace of killing intent. The more outstanding Chu Xiu's performance was, the more intense his killing intent towards Chu Xiu was. Since both sides had shed all pretense of cordiality, then he must kill Chu Xiu today. Qiao Liandong did not care about the Guanzhong torture room, but looking at the strength that Chu Xiu had displayed, it was needless to say how terrifying Chu Xiu would be in the future. If he did not kill Chu Xiu today, he would definitely become a great trouble in the future. Qiao Liandong suddenly stomped on the ground. In an instant, a sea of blood rose under his feet. Countless gang qi condensed into blood-colored threads and entangled Chu Xiu. At the same time, the floating blood divine saber in his hand slashed towards Chu Xiu with awe-inspiring saber momentum. The blood-colored sharp edge pierced through the heaven and earth, as if it was splitting the heavens. At this moment, Chu Xiu's eyes instantly bloomed with a mysterious light. The stars in the world were constantly rotating in his eyes, appearing extremely mysterious. Heaven's sun gazing at air. Previously in the pool, Chu Xiu found that his mental strength was suppressed. This meant that Chu Xiu could not use his primordial spirit secret technique, and heaven's sun gazing at air. However, when Chu Xiu was dealing with Yan Qishao, he found that the suppression of his mental strength had actually disappeared. Chu Xiu guessed that this situation should be related to Yan Qishao and the others. In fact, Yan Qishao had already removed a part of the seal in this hall, and even the chains on his limbs had been torn. If it were not for the chain on Yan Qishao's waist, Yan Qishao would have been able to join forces with Shui Wuxiang and the others to fight. Therefore, at this time, Chu Xiu chose to lure Qiao Liandong here. He was not only prepared to join forces with Yan Qishao to kill Qiao Liandong, but also because this was the only place where Chu Xiu's strength could be exerted to its peak. Under the effect of heaven's sun gazing at air, Chu Xiu's saber was drawn but not released. His figure wandered back and forth among the boundless blood-colored threads. None of those densely packed blood-colored threads could actually touch Chu Xiu. Qiao Liandong's expression suddenly became extremely ugly. It was this feeling again. Last time in the Valley of the Dead, Chu Xiu used this trick to scare him away. However, Qiao Liandong would not make the same mistake a second time. Therefore, this time, Qiao Liandong did not retreat. Instead, his saber momentum did not stop as it slashed towards Chu Xiu. Chapter 497. The effect of the heaven's sun gazing at air skill would inevitably be reduced when facing a martial Dao master. After all, a martial Dao master was different from an ordinary martial artist. The other party's power changes were 10 times, or even dozens of times stronger than an ordinary martial artist in the unity of heaven and man realm. Therefore, if Chu Xiu wanted to use the heaven's sun gazing at air skill to deduce the changes in Qiao Liandong's trajectory, He would have to put in 10 times or even dozens of times more energy than when dealing with a martial artist of the same level. Moreover, there was only one chance. Chu Xiu's mental strength did not allow him to use the heaven's sun gazing at air skill all the time, so Chu Xiu had to be cautious. The boundless blood-colored threads were dodged by Chu Xiu, and Xiao Liandong's fierce saber aura was also barely dodged by Chu Xiu. Yan Qishao also waved the chain to harass Xiao Liandong, but it had little effect. Seeing that Chu Xiu kept dodging, Yan Qishao could not help but curse. "What are you thinking? You only know how to dodge. Why aren't you attacking? Could it be that you're doing this on purpose to exhaust my strength?" Chu Xiu ignored Yan Qishao and exerted the heaven's sun gazing at air skill to the extreme. However, he did not attack and kept waiting. An unsheathed saber was the most terrifying. Xiao Liandong had not experienced the true horror of the heaven's sun gazing at air skill, but he hated this feeling. Seeing that he could not take down Chu Xiu, Xiao Liandong became more and more anxious. With a roar, the blood-colored gang qi around Xiao Liandong erupted. He slashed down with his saber, directly drawing the power of heaven and earth. The saber aura condensed into a 100-meter blood river. Even the surrounding power of heaven and earth had poured into the blood river, making the power of Xiao Liandong's saber extremely terrifying. The instant Xiao Liandong made his move, Chu Xiu, who had been evading with the heaven's sun gazing at air all this while, made his move. This was the first time Chu Xiu had attacked with his saber. Boundless devil qi and blood evil qi had been condensing on the blade for a long time. That power had been accumulated to the extreme. When the saber slashed down, the trajectory of Chu Xiu's saber could be said to be extremely strange. The saber momentum twisted and turned, and it slashed at Xiao Liandong's flaws and weakest points. Cultivation techniques and martial techniques did not necessarily have to be as powerful as possible. Moreover, Xiao Liandong was a rogue cultivator. His own cultivation technique could not be considered brilliant. This was not the only loophole that Chu Xiu could take advantage of, but it was the only loophole that Chu Xiu was confident of dealing enough damage to Xiao Liandong. This saber slashed down from the crack in the blood river, tearing apart the stellar energy. In the blink of an eye, it was already in front of Xiao Liandong. A look of shock appeared on Xiao Liandong's face. No matter how hard he tried, he could not understand how Chu Xiu had managed to tear through his attack and arrive in front of him with a saber strike that was far weaker than his. If it were an ordinary martial artist at the unity of heaven and man realm, Xiao Liandong would not have cared even if the attack was already in front of him. After all, there was a big gap between them. However, this person in front of him was Chu Xiu, who was ranked in the top 5 on the Longhu leaderboard, and could fight with him, a martial Dao grandmaster, for such a long time. "Get out of my way!" Xiao Liandong roared. He did not have time to defend, but his stellar energy still erupted around him in an attempt to resist. However, at this moment, as Chu Xiu's saber slashed down, a bright divine light suddenly bloomed in his eyes. The last remaining trace of mental strength was condensed into invisible strings by Chu Xiu. With the fluctuation of his mind, an invisible sound wave instantly erupted. It was silent, but it resounded in Xiao Liandong's heart like a demonic sound piercing his ears, causing him to groan. His stellar energy dissipated uncontrollably, and most of it dissipated. This was the soul-subduing Hades song of the 9 forms of the soul catcher. When performed at its peak, it used the primordial spirit as the strings and played with the mind. At the end of the song, the soul would be subdued. However, Chu Xiu had consumed a lot of mental strength because he had been using the heaven's sun gazing at air skill for a long time. At this time, he could not play the soul-subduing Hades song completely, and could only play it for a moment to affect Xiao Liandong. However, this was enough for Chu Xiu. As the stellar energy dissipated, Chu Xiu's saber directly smashed the remaining stellar energy. This saber slashed directly on Xiao Liandong's chest, leaving a bloody mark. The demonic aura entered his body, causing Xiao Liandong to spit out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with horror and disbelief. He had never imagined that he would actually be seriously injured by a junior practitioner like Chu Xiu. Most importantly, he had even lost in such a baffling manner. He had clearly been suppressing Chu Xiu from the start, while Chu Xiu had only been able to dodge in a sorry state. In the end, When Xiao Liandong had been prepared to deal a heavy blow to kill him, he had been stunned by Chu Xiu's series of killer moves. Even Xiao Liandong had not been able to react. Xiao Liandong did not react, but Yan Qishao did. Yan Qishao was an existence that surpassed the martial Dao Grand Master level when he was at his peak. He was not bragging when he said that he could easily crush Dong Qikuan and the others. Although he had lost his cultivation, he still had his knowledge. He could see the magic of the heaven's sun gazing at air. Why is this kid's cultivation method so similar to that of the East Sea Island Master? That guy's cultivation method was very difficult to deal with in my era. Could this kid be his successor? Yan Qishao muttered in his heart, but he did not care. It was not the time for him to think so much. 10,000 years had passed, and the people had long changed. They had also become like this, neither human nor ghost. The most important thing now was to resurrect Master Wenho. As long as Master Wenho was resurrected, they could all return to the world. Therefore, while Xiao Liandong had not reacted and was still seriously injured, Yan Qishao had already shrouded him with 4 huge chains. Moreover, countless flame arrows condensed around his body and blasted towards Xiao Liandong like a storm. Xiao Liandong raised his saber and was about to attack, but the demonic qi and murderous aura in his body erupted at the same time, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. In the face of Yan Qishao's attack, he could only barely defend himself. Chu Xiu's saber did not kill him. Martial Dao masters were not that easy to kill, but Chu Xiu's saber had left a significant impact on him. The source of the demonic qi on the heavenly demon dance was not only Chu Xiu's own earth energy, but also the material of his body, which was made from the heavenly demon order left behind by the Kunlun devil cult in the past. The demonic qi was so pure that it could not be found in the world. And Chu Xiu's own earth energy was also the blood-refined divine shield of the Blood River sect, a major demonic sect in the past. The condensed blood fiend qi and lurked in a person's body was not easy to bear. If it was under normal circumstances, Xiao Liandong could still use true qi to suppress and expel it. After all, Chu Xiu was not a martial Dao master, so it was not difficult to expel his true qi. However, Yan Qishao's act of throwing stones at him while he was down was killing him. He did not give him a chance to suppress and expel it at all. Seeing that he was in such a state, Xiao Liandong roared and burst out the last of his strength to smash Yan Qishao's chains away, then fled toward the central hall. At this point, Xiao Liandong naturally wouldn't care about face and the like. Being a martial Dao Grand Master was also fatal. Looking at Xiao Liandong's back, Chu Xiu's eyes revealed a strong killing intent. Killing Xiao Liandong but leaving his disciple alive was like cutting the grass without removing the roots. It was a very troublesome thing. On the other hand, killing Xiao Liandong's disciple, but leaving Xiao Liandong alive was like letting the tiger return to the mountain. It was a very stupid thing to do. Chu Xiu was afraid of trouble, but he was not stupid. So today, Xiao Liandong must die. In fact, Chu Xiu's current state was not very good. After using the heaven's sun gazing at air, he also used the soul-suppressing Hades song of the 9 major techniques of the soul catcher. This was a great consumption for Chu Xiu's mental strength. At this time, Chu Xiu's face was a little pale, and there was even a tingling feeling in his mind. However, Chu Xiu seemed to not feel it. He directly formed the inner binding seal with his hand, and his speed exploded to the extreme. In the blink of an eye, he had already arrived behind Xiao Liandong. The majestic Buddha's light bloomed, and Vairocana descended. The Buddha's light shone, changing the sun and stealing the sky. Under the powerful pressure of the sun-changing technique, Xiao Liandong no longer dared to escape. He looked back and could only see Chu Xiu's palm falling. His figure was hidden in the endless Buddha's light, as if the real Vairocana had arrived. Xiao Liandong roared and slashed with his saber. However, under the light of Vairocana, his saber collapsed and the blood-colored Miaodao was even blasted away. His entire body was blasted into the ground, and he spat out another mouthful of blood. For the first time, a look of horror appeared in his eyes. Xiao Liandong had fought countless enemies in his life, and he could be considered a veteran of hundreds of battles. However, he never expected that one day, he would feel the horror of death at the hands of a junior warrior like Chu Xiu. Xiao Liandong gritted his teeth and roared. His right hand directly pierced into his left arm, and a large amount of blood instantly flowed out. However, the blood did not spill on the ground. Under the control of his Gang Qi, it condensed into a blood-colored long saber made entirely of blood, shining with a terrifying luster. However, at this time, Chu Xiu seemed to not see it. He stretched out a hand, palm down, and in an instant, the boundless Buddha's light condensed in his palm. His palm was very small, but the Buddha's light seemed to be able to illuminate the world. This was a very strange feeling, but as Chu Xiu's palm fell, everything around him began to distort. The world's essence was absorbed into this palm, and even Xiao Liandong himself seemed to be included in this palm. Everything was distorted, as if a roulette was spinning. In the end, the Buddha's light erupted, and everything returned to nothingness. Life and death were illusory, and the 5 skandhas were all empty, colorless, stopping grand handprint. This move was a cultivation method created by Master Tam Yuan himself. Life and death gathered in the palm, evolving into the heavens, and a mustard seed grew. Thousands of changes were contained in this handprint. At this time, as the Buddha's light completely dissipated, Xiao Liandong's figure flew out of it. He did not have the slightest injury on his body, but the genuine qi in his body had been wiped out by the colorless stopping grand handprint. At this time, he was even weaker than an ordinary person. Holding the saber, Chu Xiu chopped off Xiao Liandong's head before he landed on the ground and held it in his hand. Although the heavenly demon dance was not stained with blood, it had in fact drunk the blood of a martial Dao master. Chapter 498. Holding Xiao Liandong's head, Chu Xiu had actually exhausted himself. The heaven's sun gazing at air, and the soul suppressing Hades' song, had severely suppressed his mental strength. Furthermore, Chu Xiu had used the sun-switching technique and the formless sealing palm in succession. Although he had killed Xiao Liandong with the series of attacks, he had expended a lot of energy. Yan Qishao silently looked at Chu Xiu, but he didn't choose to do anything. He wanted to do it, but he wasn't sure. Chu Xiu's strength was beyond his imagination. Although it was nominally Chu Xiu and Yan Qishao working together to kill Xiao Liandong, Yan Qishao was only assisting from the side. Chu Xiu was the one who actually attacked. Yan Qishao only used 20% of his strength. Although Chu Xiu seemed to be exhausted, Yan Qishao still didn't dare to make a move. Holding Xiao Liandong's head, Chu Xiu grinned at Yan Qishao and said, "I'll help you take a look at your plan to resurrect Lu Wenhou, but I'm afraid you'll be disappointed in the end." After saying that, Chu Xiu directly carried Xiao Liandong's head and returned to the tunnel. Yan Qishao also didn't say a word. At this time in the central hall, Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi were still suppressing Xian Jiuyo. As for the others, including Lu Fengxian, they were fighting for halberd. Unfortunately, whether it was Lu Fengxian or some of the Unity of the World experts, even if some of them had touched halberd, they were still repelled by halberd. This 9-revolution divine weapon was simply too stubborn. It didn't give them any chance to get it. At this time, Fang Qishao and Xie Xiaolu finally arrived. With Xie Xiaolu's strength, he could participate in the fight for halberd. As for Fang Qishao, he didn't make a move and just stared at Ying Bailu. Ying Bailu frowned and said, "Fang Qishao, why are you staring at me instead of fighting for the peerless divine weapon?" Fang Qishao chuckled and said, "Why would I snatch that thing? I'm a sword user, so I won't be able to snatch Wushuang's sword. I reckon that after Wushuang senses my aura, he'll even take the initiative to attack me. I won't do that." Infatuated seed. I heard that you fought with Chu Xiu just now and were evenly matched? TSK, you've hidden your strength quite well. Why don't we fight again? In fact, Fang Qishao was very similar to Ying Bailu in some aspects. He didn't care much about the empty titles on the Dragon and Tiger list. If the Dragon and Tiger list said he was third, then he was third. He also wouldn't take the initiative to challenge someone just because of this ranking. However, if he met an opponent he was interested in, Fang Qishao didn't mind stretching his muscles. He had fought with Zhong Xian and Zhang Qingjin on the Dragon and Tiger list, but unfortunately, he was the one who suffered. Although the guy ranked 4th on the dragon and tiger list was elusive, Feng Qishao often roamed the Jianghu. He had met that guy before, but he was rebuffed. That guy's martial Dao was the martial Dao of killing people. Once he threw his flying dagger, he would see blood and determine life and death. It was extreme to the extreme. Feng Qishao was looking for someone to compare martial Dao with, not to risk his life, so he didn't fight with his opponent at that time. As for Chu Xiu, when Chu Xiu was in the 5 Qis collecting an origin realm, although Feng Qishao had fought with Chu Xiu, that was not when Chu Xiu was at his peak. Now that Chu Xiu had stepped into the unity of heaven and man realm, the two sides were very familiar. Feng Qishao was a little embarrassed to challenge him. After all, his ranking was higher than Chu Xiu's. This time, Ying Bailu in front of him had aroused Feng Qishao's interest. Ying Bailu rarely fought before, and Feng Qishao had not seen him before. However, Feng Qishao knew about the battle between Chu Xiu and Zhong Xian. He also knew about Chu Xiu's strength. Now that Ying Bailu could fight with Chu Xiu to this realm, it was enough to show how strong Ying Bailu was. Moreover, Feng Qishao knew about the Shangshui Ying clan's heritage. Ying Bailu probably had some trump cards that he had not taken out. Looking at Feng Qishao, who was eager to fight, Ying Bailu frowned and said, "Feng Qishao, now is not the time to fight. If you are also interested in halberd, we can fight. But since you have no intention of fighting for halberd, why waste time here? I remember that you are not a person who likes to fight." Feng Qishao waved his hand and said, "You are wrong. It is not that I don't like to fight. It is just that most people do not interest me. I mean, Ying Bailu, you and I are old acquaintances. You have fought with Chu Xiu. Why can't you fight with me? You don't have to be so biased, do you?" While Feng Qishao was entangled with Ying Bailu, Chu Xiu had already recovered some qi in the tunnel. He appeared in the hall with Qiao Liandong's head in his hand. When everyone saw Chu Xiu's figure, they couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Their eyes were filled with shock. Those who didn't notice Chu Xiu earlier were also attracted by the exclamations of the crowd. When they saw the item in Chu Xiu's hand, they all sucked in a breath of cold air. Qiao Liandong was dead. A dignified martial Dao grandmaster actually died in the hands of a junior martial artist like Chu Xiu. In the history of Jianghu, killing a martial Dao grandmaster at the unity of heaven and man realm had happened many times. Even in this generation of Jianghu, little celestial master Zhang Qingzhen had done such a thing. Although Zhong Xian and the others did not have any battle records, everyone believed that the top 5 on the Longhu list were qualified to fight with martial Dao grandmasters. It was just that their battle records were not circulated. But it was just hearsay. Now that Chu Xiu was standing here with Qiao Liandong's head in his hand, it was a great shock to the people present. For these martial artists in Jianghu, martial Dao grandmasters were extremely special existences. Once they condensed the martial Dao true core, they would immediately become a respected grandmaster. They would even have the qualification to establish their own sect and become a true powerhouse in Jianghu. However, such a martial Dao grandmaster was now beheaded by a junior like Chu Xiu. They could not help but be shocked. Ying Bailu took a deep look at Chu Xiu. He was also shocked. How did Chu Xiu do it? With Ying Bailu's strength, if he were to face a martial Dao grandmaster in a life-and-death battle, Ying Bailu would not dare to say that he could win. However, if he used the Ying clan's forbidden trump cards, Ying Bailu would only have a little more confidence, but there was still no hope of winning. Looking at the shocked Feng Qishao, Ying Bailu said indifferently, "If you want to fight, you should find Chu Xiu, not me. That person is much fiercer than me. When I fought him just now, he did not use his full strength." Feng Qishao paused, and the shock on his face turned into a grin. He chuckled and said, "It's true that Chu Xiu did not use his full strength, but you didn't use your full strength either, did you? My Sword King City's sect leader once said that among the 9 great families, your Shangshui clan is the one that hides its strength the most. For so many years, the Shangshui clan has been ranked first most of the time. Even when it was surpassed by others, your Shangshui clan never panicked. Who knows when you'll catch up?" But in fact, the Shangshui clan was deliberately hiding their true strength. If the Shangshui clan revealed their true strength, it would make the other aristocratic families feel despair. Your style is the same as the Ying clan's. If you have the strength, just show it. Why hide it so deeply? While Fang Qishao was still talking nonsense with Ying Bailu, the outcome of the battle between Dong Qikuan and the others had already been decided. Xianjuyo had exhausted the power he had obtained from LV Wenho's mark. Now that the mark had disappeared, he no longer had the strength to fight the two martial Dao grandmasters. His aura had been shattered by the two martial Dao grandmasters. However, Xianjuyo's group seemed to be undying existences in this place of suppression. Although the aura on his body had been scattered, he had reformed his body. However, this body was a little smaller than before, and appeared to be a little weaker. Xianjuyo said anxiously, "Things have gone wrong. We can't win. What should we do now?" Shui Wuxiang didn't say anything. Just when Xianjuyo was about to say something, Shui Wuxiang's clone appeared from the ground with Qiao Liandong's headless corpse. Shui Wuxiang said in a deep voice, "What else can we do? Now we can only forcefully revive Lord Wenho. It doesn't matter if we have a suitable body or if we have enough qi and blood. In any case, this is the only method we have left. Otherwise, if we attract the experts outside, especially the ox-nosed Taoist sect and the bald donkey Buddhist sect, once they make a move, we won't even be able to keep our true spirits. Shi Juling, activate the formation and extract this fellow's qi and blood. Together with the qi and blood that we have accumulated, place them at the center of the formation. Xianjuyo and I will stall for time." As soon as he finished speaking, Shui Wuxiang and Xianjuyo immediately rushed up to block Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi. However, the two of them didn't have the cultivation of a martial Dao grandmaster, so they were directly shattered by the two. When they reformed their bodies, their strength wasn't even comparable to the unity of heaven and man realm. However, the time that the two of them bought was more than enough because the array was set up by Shui Wuxiang beforehand. This place was the place where Marquis LV Wenho was sealed. There weren't any materials here, but in these 10,000 years, Shui Wuxiang had been slowly dismantling the formation that was suppressing them. Then he transferred the materials here and laid down a formation that could resurrect Marquis LV Wenho. Although the formation had been set up, there was a deviation in the plan. No one could guarantee whether LV Wenho could be resurrected. With a wave of Shi Jiuling's hand, Qiao Liandong's corpse was instantly dried up and turned into beads of blood that fell onto the formation below the coffin. Shi Jiuling threw out a large pile of beads of blood and formed a seal with his withered hands. In an instant, a torrential demonic aura filled the sky and a wave of ghostly wails resounded throughout the hall. Chapter 499. As Shi Jiuling triggered the array, the entire hall was instantly shrouded in demonic aura and became extremely cold. Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi's faces changed abruptly, and they couldn't help taking a few steps back. After all, that was the ancient demon deity, LV Wenho. Xianjuyo had only borrowed a wisp of aura left behind by LV Wenho, and he could already fight them to such an extent. If the real LV Wenho came, how terrifying would he be? At this moment, a large amount of demonic aura gushed out from the coffin that was suppressing LV Wenho. The demonic aura in the coffin seemed to be boiling and constantly surging. At the same time, the blood beads in the center of the array continued to pour into it, causing the demonic aura to surge even more violently. The 36 true martial evil extermination swords that were nailed to the coffin were trembling as well, and it seemed like they could no longer hold the coffin down. In the end, an explosion resounded, and the 36 true martial evil extermination swords instantly exploded. The coffin opened, but there wasn't a demon deity in the dense black mist that everyone had imagined. Instead, a smaller coffin emerged from the coffin. To be precise, it wasn't a coffin, but a humanoid figure cast from bronze. The humanoid figure was burly and wore battle armor, but it didn't have a head. It was as if someone had cast a headless corpse in bronze water. Furthermore, the humanoid figure was engraved with dense runes. If one took a closer look, they would discover that the runes on the left side of the humanoid figure were Taoist runes, while the right side was Buddhist Sanskrit. Since ancient times, Taoist and Buddhist sects had been opposing each other. In the past 1,000 years, The only time that Taoist and Buddhist sects joined forces was when they faced the Kunlun devil cult. However, LV Wenho actually managed to get both Taoist and Buddhist sects to join forces to suppress him. It had to be said that regardless of whether LV Wenho was righteous or evil, he had done it to the extreme. The qi and blood condensed by Shi Juling were constantly being absorbed into LV Wenho's body. Gradually a figure emerged. It was hazy, but its aura was extremely powerful. Even a martial grandmaster like Dong Qikuan couldn't help but have the urge to kneel. Retreat. Dong Qikuan barked and ordered the Dong clan's people to retreat. It was only at this moment when he sensed the terrifying aura that his rationality completely overcame his greed. The things left behind by Marquis LV Wenho were indeed extremely precious, but no matter how precious these things were, one needed to be alive to enjoy them. However, right at that moment, LV Wenho's figure suddenly erupted with countless strands of demonic energy that entangled everyone. The aura was so majestic that it caused everyone's expressions to change. Dong Qikuan and the others quickly blocked the threads, and so did Chu Xiu and the others. Moreover, Chu Xiu also discovered that those silk threads were almost all aimed at the two martial Dao Grand Masters, Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi, as well as the younger generation martial artists like Chu Xiu. The weaker or older martial artists were not targeted. Chu Xiu's own consumption was not small, but he still directly slashed those demonic energy threads. The power of these demonic energy threads was not small. Fortunately, Chu Xiu had stayed in the tunnel for a while to recover his strength. Otherwise he might not have been able to resist them. Moreover, at this time the blood beads under the coffin also decreased rapidly. This made the expressions of Shi Juling and the others suddenly change, and they shouted in a low voice, "Oh no! The power of qi and blood is not enough." Previously, according to Shui Wuxiang and the others' calculations, as long as they killed these three martial Dao Grand Masters, the power of qi and blood would be completely enough. Killing more people was actually just insurance. But now, only one of the three martial Dao Grand Masters died. Of course, the power of qi and blood was not enough. But now that their strength was right here, where could they go to kill more people? So on this side, Shui Wuxiang directly gritted his teeth and said, "Everyone, sacrifice your true spirits. Otherwise, if Lord Wenho cannot be resurrected, none of us will live." Shi Juling and Xian Juyo exchanged a glance, both standing in the middle of the array. The grayish-white flames burned, becoming more vigorous, and the demonic energy threads that extended from LV Wenho's body also became more vigorous. This time, even Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi couldn't withstand it. They were martial Dao Grand Masters, so the pressure they felt was also the greatest. The two of them gritted their teeth, directly burst out with all their strength, slashed the threads in front of them, and directly fled. Dong Qikuan wanted to save the Dong clan's disciples, but seeing that the situation was getting worse, Dong Qikuan didn't dare to stay any longer. As Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi fled, the demonic energy threads became more and more vigorous. Even Chu Xiu and the others couldn't withstand it. At this moment, there was a slight change in Chu Xiu's expression. This scene was also a little beyond his imagination. LV Wenho was already suppressed to this extent, so how could he still have such strength? In his previous life, how did Lu Fengxian obtain this inheritance? Seeing that something was wrong, Chu Xiu was about to call out to Lu Fengxian to temporarily retreat, but the demonic energy threads suddenly wrapped around Lu Fengxian, forcibly pulling her into that person's coffin. The strength of the demonic energy threads released by LV Wenho was actually about the same, but among them, the ones who received the most attention were Chu Xiu, Feng Qishao, Ying Bailu, Yin Fian, and Lu Fengxian. Among these five people, only Lu Fengxian and Yin Fian were the weakest. However, Yin Fian was a woman, so even if LV Wenho wanted to revive her, he would choose someone else, and not Yin Fian. Therefore, the strength that Yin Fian had to endure was actually the lightest. However, Lu Fengxian's strength was a bit weaker than Chu Xiu and the others, so while Chu Xiu and the others were fine, Lu Fengxian was pulled into that coffin. Chu Xiu's expression changed, and he wanted to cut open the demonic energy threads, but it was useless. Chu Xiu switched to Buddhist martial arts, and even used the great art of changing sun, but it was still useless. On the other side, Shui Wuxiang and the others revealed a trace of joy. Previously, they thought that Lu Fengxian's body was the most suitable for Lord Wenhou, and now it seemed that it was indeed so. Lord Wenhou's choice was exactly the same as theirs. Lu Fengxian's body was imprisoned in that coffin, and LV Wenhou's bronze body was tightly attached to her body. A misty radiance flickered, and the hazy figure fused into Lu Fengxian's body, causing Lu Fengxian to let out a cry of pain. Just when everyone thought that Lu Fengxian's body would be completely taken over by LV Wenhou, Lu Fengxian's body suddenly emitted a dim light. That dim light was actually emitted by the small jade pendant on her chest. That dim light was very dim, but it was this dim light that prevented LV Wenhou's true spirit from entering Lu Fengxian's body. And when LV Wenhou's true spirit wanted to leave Lu Fengxian's body, that dim light was actually obstructing him. Just like that, the bodies of Shui Wuxiang and the others below started to change. Xianjiuyou and Shui Wuxiang's bodies became dimmer and dimmer, the black mist dissipated, and the water vapor evaporated. Shi Juling wasn't any better. Cracks had already appeared on his bones, and it was obvious that he wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Moreover, the runes in the entire palace started to flicker, and it was a clear sign that the seal was about to be completely destroyed. At this moment, a skeleton covered in flames ran out from the tunnel, and it was Yan Qishao. The seal had already loosened, and the last chain that imprisoned Yan Qishao also broke. Shui Wuxiang roared, "Quickly come and help us." Yan Qishao also didn't say a word, and directly entered the array, burning his true spirit to support LV Wenhou in resisting the dim light from the jade pendant. But no one knew what the jade pendant was, and even with Yan Qishao's help, it still firmly imprisoned LV Wenhou's true spirit. At the last moment, LV Wenhou's true spirit finally couldn't hold on any longer, and it exploded with a loud bang. No! Shui Wuxiang and the others roared in anger, and their voices revealed endless unwillingness and grief. LV Wenhou's true spirit was previously sealed in the bronze humanoid, and this thing was used to imprison LV Wenhou. But under Shui Wuxiang's control, he had changed the soul-suppressing and soul-locking curse into the soul-accumulating and soul-locking curse, which allowed this array to have the effect of protecting the true spirit. Therefore, LV Wenhou only had one chance. Once his true spirit broke free from the shackles, but he didn't manage to seize another body, it would inevitably shatter like this. They had schemed for so long, and finally someone had come in. Although the process was a little rough, it could still be considered smooth. But who would have thought that in the end, they would be defeated by such an inexplicable thing? But what happened next was somewhat out of everyone's expectations. After LV Wenhou's true spirit shattered, it didn't dissipate. Instead, it was still imprisoned by the dim light of the jade pendant. And in the end, it actually fused into Lu Fengxian's body. Lu Fengxian held his head, and a pained expression appeared on his face as he closed his eyes. But when he opened his eyes again, his gaze was very frightening. No one could describe that kind of gaze. It was a kind of indifferent feeling, as if he was looking down on the world, disregarding everything, as if he was a god. But this kind of gaze only existed for a moment before it disappeared, and what replaced it was Lu Fengxian's confused gaze. Lu Fengxian subconsciously waved his hand, and the unparalleled halberd, which was originally repelling Lu Fengxian, flew into Lu Fengxian's hand on its own, and in an instant, a frightening light blossomed from it. Shui Wuxiang and the others looked at each other, and a trace of confusion appeared in their eyes. Did they succeed or not? Lord Wenhou's true spirit had shattered, but the shattered true spirit had fused into this boy's body. Moreover, the unparalleled halberd had taken the initiative to recognize Lu Fengxian as its master. What the hell was going on? Did seizing someone's body become an inheritance? But Shui Wuxiang and the others didn't have the time to think about this. They had burned their true spirits, and were only left with a single breath. So Shui Wuxiang and the others immediately made their move. They randomly found 4 weak cultivators present, and pounced on them, occupying their bodies, and seizing their bodies to be reborn. With their current strength, it was unrealistic to find strong cultivators, and they didn't have the time to be picky about height and talent. Their first priority was to preserve their lives. Chapter 500. The seal suppressing LV Wenho had already been broken, and the whole place looked like it was about to collapse. Lu Fengxian held the unparalleled divine weapon and walked towards Chu Xiu with a slightly confused look on his face. However, Chu Xiu quietly took a step back and condensed the aura around him to the extreme. Chu Xiu couldn't be blamed for being nervous. In fact, when they saw Lu Fengxian move, everyone present also subconsciously took a step back. Although they had watched LV Wenho's true soul shatter with their own eyes, there were too many incredible things that could happen at LV Wenho's level. Only God knew if Lu Fengxian would be possessed or not. Lu Fengxian also reacted at this time. He smiled bitterly and said, "Brother Chu, I'm really fine. LV Wenho's true soul has completely shattered." Chu Xiu quietly used the heaven's sun gazing at air technique to check again. After finding no abnormalities, he said, "Did you get LV Wenho's inheritance?" Lu Fengxian nodded and said, "You can say that, but I think LV Wenho himself didn't want to give me the inheritance. Moreover, I also got some vague memories, but I can't remember them." As soon as this statement came out, everyone present, including Fang Qishao and Ying Bailu, looked at Lu Fengxian with strange eyes. This was a great opportunity. That was the inheritance of the ancient demon lord LV Wenho. And now Lu Fengxian was holding the unparalleled divine weapon that belonged to LV Wenho. It could be said that all the benefits this time were in the hands of Lu Fengxian. Even Fang Qishao and Ying Bailu were a little jealous of Lu Fengxian's luck. In fact, among those who entered the place where LV Wenho's seal was suppressed this time, Lu Fengxian didn't stand out at all, excluding Dong Qikuan and the other two martial Dao grandmasters. The most outstanding ones were Chu Xiu, who had killed a martial Dao grandmaster, and Ying Bailu, who had displayed an unparalleled cultivation base. In the end, neither of them managed to obtain the inheritance. Everything was taken by Lu Fengxian. It had to be said that luck was sometimes more important than strength. Puzzled, Chu Xiu pointed at the jade pendant on Lu Fengxian's chest and asked, "What is this?" Everyone could see that without this jade pendant, it was estimated that Lu Fengxian would have been possessed by Lu Wenho. Because of this jade pendant, Lu Fengxian was able to reverse the situation. LV Fengxian took out the jade pendant. However, there was already a crack on the jade pendant. Touching the crack on the jade pendant, Lu Fengxian's expression was a little distressed. "When I was young, my mother asked for this jade pendant from a temple on a mountain for me. It was blessed by an eminent monk. When I was young, I was a little weak and sickly, so my mother asked me to wear this jade pendant at all times, saying that it could keep me safe for a lifetime." Chu Xiu was a little speechless. Lu Fengxian was born with divine strength. Even if he didn't cultivate a body-tempering cultivation method, his strength was not inferior to a martial artist who cultivated a body-tempering cultivation method. But he was actually weak and sickly when he was young. However, what surprised Chu Xiu even more was the origin of this jade pendant. He asked curiously, "Brother Lu, who was the eminent monk who gave you this jade pendant? You can't really think that ordinary things can resist Lu Wenho's true spirit, right?" Lu Fengxian was a person with luck, Chu Xiu was very sure, so he was also surprised that the person who gave Lu Fengxian this jade pendant should be a reclusive eminent monk, at least at the level of Master Tam Yuan. However, Lu Fengxian shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "That eminent monk is an eminent monk in the eyes of ordinary people, but in fact, he doesn't know martial arts. The last time I went back to the northern Yen to visit my relatives, I wanted to see this master, but the temple was already abandoned. I asked the villagers around, and they said that the master was old, and the acolytes that he took in were tired of the lack of pilgrims in the temple, and that it was too poor, so they went to a big temple. The master couldn't hold on for long, and passed away several years ago." Chu Xiu was speechless. Since the master was gone, he wouldn't be able to find anything. However, it was obvious that this jade pendant was a treasure. It couldn't guarantee Lu Fengxian's safety for a lifetime, but it could guarantee his safety for a while, just like now. Looking at the crumbling hall around him, Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "Brother Lu, let's go. This place is about to collapse." LV Fengxian nodded. The others still wanted to search around to see if there were any treasures, but seeing that they couldn't hold on for much longer, they could only grit their teeth, turn around and run out. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Dong Qikuen and Su Tingyi had ugly expressions on their faces. They were forced to come out, and it could be said that their trip was in vain. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family also arrived with the other members of the Dong family, and they were in a cautious and defensive posture. They had found such a large tomb during the mountain opening ceremony. Of course, not all the martial artists of the Dong family had entered it, but some of them had returned to the Dong family to inform the patriarch. For relics like this, the Dong family would usually leave half of its people outside to provide support, in order to prevent any unforeseen events from happening, and everyone being caught in one fell swoop. The people brought by the patriarch of the Dong family were to provide support outside. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family's expression was also a little ugly. He snorted coldly and said, "Qikuen, so many disciples of our Dong family were there. As the patriarch, you abandoned so many disciples and fled alone. Is this your responsibility as the patriarch of the Dong family?" Dong Qikuen's face was a little red. At that time, he really didn't think so much, and he only thought about saving his own life. However, now that the patriarch of the Dong family pointed out in front of so many people, Dong Qikuen still felt a little embarrassed. Dong Qikuen couldn't help but explain, "Patriarch, it's not that I don't want to save my disciples, but you didn't see that scene. That was the true spirit of the ancient demon god LV1Ho. Once it unleashed its power, let alone a martial Dao Grand Master, I guess even a true fire spirit refinement realm expert wouldn't be able to withstand it. If I escaped first, I could still save some strength. If I was in there, I'm afraid even I would have to die there." The best way to cover up one's weakness was to exaggerate the enemy's strength, and this was what Dong Qikuen was doing now. In fact, at that time, Dong Qikuen was far from being unable to withstand it, but he was really scared, and subconsciously chose to escape first. However, the patriarch of the Dong family was also a shrewd person, and he knew what Dong Qikuen was thinking at a glance. He couldn't help but snort coldly and said, "Even a true fire spirit refinement realm expert couldn't withstand it? You even fought with a true fire spirit refinement realm expert? Why didn't I know?" Just when Dong Qikuen was about to say something, he saw that many martial artists had already escaped from the big tomb, and many of them were members of the Dong family, which made Dong Qikuen immediately let out a sigh of relief. He quickly called a martial artist over and asked, "What's the situation inside?" The martial artist of the Dong family panted and immediately told him what had happened, but after listening to it, the patriarch of the Dong family was so angry that his face turned red. "Trash! Dong Qikuen, is this how you act as the patriarch? You're the first to escape when you encounter a crisis, but in the end, you leave the opportunity to others." In the eyes of the patriarch of the Dong family, if Dong Qikuen didn't go out, there was no reason why a junior could obtain LV1Ho's inheritance, but Dong Qikuen, a martial Dao Grand Master, couldn't. Dong Qikuen's face turned red, but he still lowered his head and said in a deep voice, "Patriarch, please calm down. It's not impossible. Patriarch, don't forget that this is the opening ceremony of the Dong family, and everything found belongs to the Dong family, including LV1Ho's inheritance and the divine weapon Peerless Halberd." As soon as they heard Dong Qikuen's words, the surrounding martial artists of the Dong family and Su Tingyi immediately understood what he meant. Dong Qikuen was going to ignore the rules and seize the inheritance that belonged to Lu Fengxian. Logically speaking, the rules of the mountain opening ceremony was that so long as it was something that could be taken away, then the person who obtained it could take it away. If one had to hand over the things one found, then who would participate in the mountain opening ceremony? Go and play by yourselves. Therefore, what Dong Qikuen was doing now was disregarding the rules. Su Tingyi, who was standing aside, didn't say anything. He was an outsider, and there were so many people of the Dong family here, so he definitely couldn't get any benefits, so he could only be a spectator with peace of mind. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family frowned and said, "But the rules of the opening ceremony." Dong Qikuen sneered and said, "Patriarch, the rules are dead but people are alive. Those are the ancient demonic god LV1Ho's cultivation method, and Peerless 9th Revolution divine weapon. It is worth it to break the rules for these things, and bear some infamy, but it is also worth it. The patriarch of the Dong family was a martial artist of the older generation who adhered to the old rules, and he still wanted to save some face, so he was somewhat reluctant to break the rules. But at this time Dong Chikuan encouraged, patriarch, that is LV Wonho's inheritance cultivation method. Not to mention the peerless divine weapon. LV Wonho's inheritance cultivation method must be above the 9th revolution. The words 9th revolution cultivation method tilted the balance in the patriarch's heart, because the Dong family didn't have a 9th revolution cultivation method. The cultivation methods in the Jianghu, from the 1st revolution to the 9th revolution, were actually divided into 3 grades. Generally, the 1st revolution to the 3rd revolution were the ordinary ones, and most of the rogue martial artists and some small sects and families had them. The 4th revolution to the 6th revolution were already considered good cultivation methods, and the martial artists without a bit of luck and background couldn't get them. As for the 7th revolution to the 9th revolution level cultivation methods, generally only people with profound luck and inheritance, and some big forces could get their hands on them. As for the peerless cultivation methods and supreme cultivation methods, except for some people with great luck and luck, only forces at the level of the Great Light Temple were qualified to have them. The strength of the Dong family was not weak, but the Dong family's strongest internal cultivation method was only at the 8th revolution level, which was not weak, but also not strong. If they could get the demonic god LV Wonho's cultivation method inheritance, it would be a 9th revolution level existence. People like Ying Bailu and Fang Qishao didn't care, because they could choose more than one 9th revolution cultivation method. But for the Dong family, even if they gave up their current cultivation method and changed to LV Wonho's cultivation method, it was worth it. Chapter 501. Just as Dong Chikuan had said, rules were dead, but people were alive. With the inheritance of LV Wonho in front of him, even the patriarch of the Dong family was tempted. In fact, the patriarch of the Dong family was not young anymore. Although he still had a long lifespan, his qi and blood were already declining. At this time, he couldn't enter the true fire spirit refining realm, even if he cultivated a peerless divine skill, let alone the 9 revolutions cultivation method. Therefore, the patriarch of the Dong family wholeheartedly considered the Dong family. In this generation, the Dong family was neither high nor low among the 9 great families. It was an awkward position. Moreover, there was no successor among the Dong family's descendants. Not to mention an excellent disciple like Ying Bailu, they couldn't even enter the top 50 of the Longhu list. If they could obtain LV Wonho's inheritance, the strength of the next generation of the Dong family would definitely improve greatly. One day, they might be able to rank among the top of the 9 great families. They might even be able to compete with the Shangshui Ying family. Thinking of this, the patriarch of the Dong family became eager. He nodded and said, "All right, we'll do as you say." However, at this time a martial artist of the Dong family said hesitantly, Patriarch, although Lu Fengxian is a rogue cultivator, she's not simple. He's very close friends with Chu Xiao of the Guanzhong torture room. He's also good friends with Xie Xiaolu of the World Alliance. I heard that Lu Fengxian was even appreciated by Chen Qingdi. Chen Qingdi once invited Lu Fengxian to join the World Alliance, but Lu Fengxian refused. If we forcibly snatch Lu Fengxian's opportunity, won't we get into trouble? Dong Chikuan and the patriarch of the Dong family looked at each other. They really didn't know about this. They were all martial artists of the older generation. Naturally, they wouldn't care about what happened in the Jianghu of the younger generation. But Dong Chikuan shook his head and said with a cold smile, "No matter, this is West Chu, not the Guanzhong torture room. The one we are moving against is not Chu Xiao, so we don't need to worry about the Guanzhong torture room. The same goes for the Heaven Alliance. If Lu Fengxian is a member of the Heaven Alliance, the Dong clan will naturally give face to Chen Qingdi. However, Lu Fengxian had nothing to do with the Heaven Alliance. He was just a good friend of Chen Qingdi's disciple. He wasn't worth such a big deal. Although Chen Qingdi is overbearing, he still has to abide by the rules and be reasonable. There's no need to care about the Heaven Alliance either." Seeing that the patriarch was confident, the disciple of the Dong clan didn't say anything else. After all, as long as he obtained the cultivation technique, he would be qualified to cultivate it as a disciple of the Dong clan. At this time, Chu Xiu, Lu Fengxian, and the others had also escaped from the big tomb. Not long after they left, the whole tomb began to collapse. Seeing this scene, Chu Xiu couldn't help but shake his head. In fact, everyone had neglected the fact that this big tomb was originally a treasure. Back then, this big tomb was built to suppress Marquis LV Wenho. It should have been the joint effort of Taoism and Buddhism. The inside of this big tomb was sealed by double formations of Taoism and Buddhism, and all of them were passed down from ancient times. If they could make a copy of it, it would be very worthwhile to study it. However, it was too late now. The big tomb had collapsed, and the people who came later could only find some scattered runes, which were not very useful. After leaving the big tomb, Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian were ready to leave and recuperate for a period of time. Chu Xiu was ready to recover his strength. He had just killed a martial Dao grandmaster, and he was a little exhausted. He had hurt some of his vitality, so he needed to recuperate in time. As for Lu Fengxian, he needed to find a place to enter seclusion to break through to the oneness of heaven and man realm. That's right, he wanted to break through to the oneness of heaven and man realm. This time, Lu Fengxian benefited not only from Marquis LV Wenho's inheritance, but also from Marquis LV Wenho's true spirit fragment into Lu Fengxian's body, which also gave Lu Fengxian an extremely majestic power. Now Lu Fengxian had not refined this power, but he could already feel that he was at the threshold of the oneness of heaven and man realm. He only needed to enter seclusion to refine it. Even Chu Xiu had to admit that Lu Fengxian's creation was really incomparable. Along the way, Chu Xiu had also seized a lot of opportunities, but he had also fought and killed more. After going through so many twists and turns, Chu Xiu had obtained his current realm and strength. Although Lu Fengxian had also encountered a lot of things, it was not as many as Chu Xiu. However, he had caught up so quickly, and this speed even made Chu Xiu feel a little jealous. Sure enough, luck was something that could not be explained. Just as Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian were about to leave, the Dong family's martial artists had already surrounded them. The martial artists present were suddenly stunned, and they did not know what the Dong family wanted. Chu Xiu frowned, and suddenly felt that something was wrong. Dong Qikuan stood out and said with a smile, "My Dong family is very grateful that everyone has come to participate in my opening mountain ceremony. However, according to the rules, some things belong to my Dong family, so if you have taken something from my Dong family, please hand it over." As soon as these words came out, everyone present was stunned, and then they subconsciously looked at Lu Fengxian, and immediately retreated. In the big tomb that suppressed Marquis LV Wenho, they did not obtain any benefits at all. Even if they were asked to hand it over, they would not be able to. The only one who had obtained benefits was Lu Fengxian. Lu Fengxian frowned, but did not say anything. At this time, Dong Qikuan looked at Lu Fengxian with a fake smile, and said, "Little friend Lu, if you have taken something, then hand it over. Do you really want me to say it by name?" Lu Fengxian's expression did not change, and she said, "Dong family head, what do you mean? According to the rules of the opening mountain ceremony, everything that can be taken away, and only the things that can't be taken away will belong to the Dong family." Dong Qikuan said indifferently, "Oh, that's right. Since it's like this, then I will leave little friend Lu here, and then you will not be able to take it away, right?" As soon as these words came out, the expressions of everyone present changed, and it seemed that Dong Qikuan was prepared to completely break the rules and act shamelessly. Everyone present looked at Lu Fengxian with a trace of sympathy. The strength of this Lu Fengxian's karmic luck really made them envious. Among so many people, only she had obtained the inheritance of the demonic god LV Wenho. But no matter how strong one's karmic luck was, it was not stronger than one's fist. At present, the Dong family's fist was stronger, and it was obvious that they wanted to seize LV Wenho's inheritance. What could Lu Fengxian do? At the level of the Dong family, it was fine for them to abide by the rules, but even if they broke the rules and seized the inheritance of the younger generation, they would at most be scolded, and so what? In any case, they would not be hurt. At the side, Chu Xiu said coldly, Dong family head, you have broken the rules of the mountain opening ceremony. Aren't you afraid of being despised by the other martial arts forces of West Chu? Dong Qikuan glanced at Chu Xiu and said indifferently, despised? Our Dong family has been in the martial world for a long time. When have we ever been afraid of being scolded? Chu Xiu, I know you are good friends with Lu Fengxian, but you'd better not get involved in this matter. Now the wisest choice for you is to persuade your friend to hand over LV1 Ho's inheritance and the unparalleled divine weapon, and you can leave safely. Otherwise you can leave, but I'm afraid Lu Fengxian will have to stay in our Dong family as a guest for a while. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. It seemed that the reputation of the Guanzhong torture room was not very famous in the martial world, and the Dong family did not have the slightest fear of it. Of course, Chu Xiu soon found out that the Dong family was now blinded by greed, and the Guanzhong torture room was not the only thing they were not afraid of. The Dong family had gone too far in this matter. Even Feng Qishao, who had not planned to speak up before, could not help but speak up. Hey, don't you think your Dong family is a little too unreasonable? If you do this, who will help your Dong family the next time they hold the mountain opening ceremony? Dong Qikuan glanced at Feng Qishao and said indifferently, so it turns out to be young Master Feng of Sword King City. Young Master Feng, you don't need to worry about my Dong family's matters. This matter has nothing to do with Sword King City. It was true that Sword King City was stronger than his Dong family. Normally, when Feng Qishao came, the Dong family would definitely give him face and serve him well. But now it was fine if Feng Qishao did not speak up. Even if Feng Qishao spoke up now, the Dong family would not give him face. Seventh young Master Feng furrowed his brows as a rare gloomy look appeared in his eyes. In fact, Feng Qishao was different from other disciples who always talked about Sword King City. He rarely used his sect to oppress others, but today was the first time someone did not give him face and openly looked down on Sword King City. Ying Bailu did not speak, he just watched silently. The Ying clan was one of the 9 great families, just like the Dong family. Although Ying Bailu disapproved of the Dong family's behavior, he would not speak up to stop them. Yan Fian wanted to speak up for Lu Fengxian. After all, Lu Fengxian saved her just now. But when she saw what happened to Feng Qishao, she immediately swallowed her words. The Dong family was determined to snatch Lu Fengxian's inheritance. They did not even give face to Sword King City, let alone the Yunu Palace. After all, the Yunu Palace's strength was not comparable to Sword King City, and it was not even comparable to the Dong family itself. Chu Xiu raised the heavenly demon dance in his hand and said indifferently, humans need face, trees need bark. I didn't expect the Dong family to be so shameless this time. Dong Qikuan, I'll give you face. You're a martial Dao grandmaster, the patriarch of the Dong family. If I don't want to give you face, it's not like I haven't killed martial Dao grandmasters before. Lu Fengxian also raised the unparalleled divine weapon in her hand. She did not say anything, but the black glass dragon on the unparalleled divine weapon let out a deep roar. In an instant, a ferocious aura burst out. The aura even made Dong Qikuan's expression change. Only then did Dong Qikuan realize that he should not have treated Chu Xiu as an ordinary unity of heaven and man cultivator. Although no one knew how Chu Xiu killed Xiao Liandong, it was Chu Xiu's real battle record. If he insisted on interfering in this matter, his deterrence would not be inferior to a real martial Dao grandmaster. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.